All right, so we have a special episode today for HPP, and we're specifically talking about the Brandon Miller incident that involved the murder of Jamea Harris on the early morning of January 15th. I'm just going to give the Cliff Notes version. Apparently, Darius Miles, who was a former Alabama player, and his friend Michael Davis got into some kind of altercation with Ms. Harris, her boyfriend, and her cousin. And at some point, Brandon Miller was supposed to pick up Miles and his friend, and Miles had been texting Miller to come pick him up, and one of the last texts he sent to Miller was to bring his gun. And so when Miller arrived, Miles and the friend got in the car. Apparently, according to the police, the gun was hidden under clothing, or at least covered up by clothing, and he handed the gun to Davis. Told him that there was one in the chamber, and Davis proceeded to go over to the driver's side of the victim's car where she was sitting, where her boyfriend was driving, and shot her point blank in the face and killed her. So the thing that has a lot of people upset, including, I know, for example, Yahoo reporter Dan Wetzel, who I've been talking about this off and on for about a week about, invited Dan to be on the show, but he declined. But he and many other people seem to think that Miller was more involved than his attorney or the school is indicating. So I guess the first question is, and you probably don't know the answer to this. We're going to have an Alabama reporter, a local reporter, come on later. But one of the things that has always confused me about the story, and I haven't been able to get a clear answer, is why Jaden Bradley also showed up at the scene at the same time as Miller. And there's also conflicting testimony there. The police say that Bradley and Miller's car blocked the victim's car from leaving. His attorney says that video evidence will prove that that's not the case. But I don't know what Jaden Bradley was actually doing there, but I doubt you can comment on that. Can you, Len?
No, I can't. Obviously all the facts are, there are some of them that are contradicting. Certainly, the Brandon Miller's attorneys, they have a viewpoint that, pretty much exonerates him because of that key element of a crime, which is knowledge. And, they say he had no knowledge that the weapon was in the car, had no knowledge of Miles or the actual perpetrator's intent. So, that essentially, takes Miller out of complicity. But again, I'm not sure that there is any criminal culpability based on Alabama law, which I'm not really knowledgeable of. However, the one thing that's important is that as these facts continue to swirl around and the investigation continues, that while currently these guys aren't necessarily targets or not necessarily people of interest, that's subject to change if the investigation yields, different set of facts.
Right. And I should have introduced Len at the top. Of course, Len is a former college All-American in Maryland, NBA, ABA player for 12 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Long enough.
Right. And moved on to graduate from Harvard Law School and worked as an attorney, also a prosecutor in Brooklyn. So Len brings clearly some experience and knowledge, especially from the legal side, that we felt that would be very helpful. So you brought up what Alabama law is, and it seems to me the police are saying what you said. If we can't prove intent,
or knowledge,
right, right.
that would lead
So,
to it.
and so one of the things, and the reason why I brought up Bradley is because, if Miller was just there to pick them up, then why is Bradley there? And your mind immediately, goes through scenarios. And I'm thinking, well, the only reason I could think Bradley would be there would be because he knew his buddy was in trouble and he wanted to have his buddy's back. And so they both showed up. Maybe I'm overlooking other things, reasons why he would be there. But you see how that doesn't look good?
Well, I mean, again, there are probably a number of reasons why, and you're going to need more facts than just the circumstantial or,
Right.
The ability to jump to a conclusion. And again, you have to weigh everything through the lens of whether or not you can prove to a trier of fact beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. So the police, it seems to me that what I've read, and this is coming from reporters, not the police themselves, but reporters are basically reporting this as if it is irrelevant, according to Alabama law, that Miller, if he knew the gun was in the car or had read the text to bring the car. Is it possible that Alabama is, because what I'm thinking, and here's what I'm thinking, and I would think, like, in the state I live in, New Jersey, he would definitely have been charged with something because our gun laws are so different. But I'm thinking, I can't believe if you knew a gun was in the car and you knew your friend had asked for a gun, you knew your friend was out drinking, I would consider that to be very reckless to bring the gun to him.
Well, I mean, it would actually could be considered facilitation of a crime. Crime doesn't happen unless you facilitate by bringing the weapon to the scene, which means you have to have knowledge that the weapon is there. You have to have knowledge, potentially knowledge of the intent. Although, again, circumstantially, when somebody tells you, bring me my joint or my gun, you got to use common sense and say, okay, why? And that, to me, is less of an issue with regard to, the state law and criminal prosecution as it is essentially for, the rules of the athletic department and the University of Alabama to have young people involved in those types of situations. And I think Alabama has, as a university, rules about not allowing that kind of involvement. And right now there hasn't been any repercussion for that involvement by Brandon Miller. Again, no investigation by the University of Alabama to elicit facts because this is a criminal investigation. And, I understand why they don't want to, carry on an investigation parallel to that of law enforcement, because it certainly could provide interference and certainly could, provide a shield for perpetrators if different facts are elicited. So, they're going to step back and do that. But at some point, they have to do an investigation. Unfortunately, by the time they get around to it, Brandon Miller won't be a student athlete there.
Len, a big part of the evidence out there right now, and that has been contradicted, is the blocking of the Jeep. Witnesses say Bradley and Miller, both cars were blocking the Jeep. The attorney says Miller's car was already there. It was already parked, which contradicts a lot of the reports we have been seeing. Now, as a former prosecutor and trying to put your feet in the Tuscaloosa DA's head right now, is that a big piece of evidence? Is that something they are currently investigating? Or do you believe it is something, hey, we're going after Miles and the shooter now, and Miller, for the most part, is done. And last part of that question is, could you potentially see a potential plea bargain for offered to Miller to Miles to implicate Miller?
Well, first question is, it could be a significant piece of evidence that could make Miller complicit if you can prove that the car was parked with an understanding of what was going to go down. Again, and he becomes conspiratorial as well as as an accomplice in that situation. But again, if his car was already there, it's hard to elicit an understanding from him and Miles and whomever else were involved, unless you have something concrete that demonstrates that they did, conspire to block the car. Now, if you can see the car moving there prior to, giving the gun and some of the other stuff, I mean, you might have a circumstantial case. But I think the prosecutors right now are going after the low-hanging fruit, which are the actual, perpetrators of the crime, possession of the weapon and the actual firing of the weapon. So that's the first thing. And I think the rest of that stuff might come at some point. Second issue is a plea bargain. I guess you probably could do that if they were so inclined to, believe that Brandon Miller had something to do with it, but couldn't absolutely prove it. But again, if you say he's a co-conspirator, then you're going to need some kind of corroborating evidence beyond just Miles's testimony. So you still are going to have to prove some way, shape, and form, and that might come to blocking, the blocking of the path of the victim's car or whatever. You're still going to need some kind of corroborating evidence, with a co-conspirator's testimony.
Question. The DA for Tuscaloosa County is a former Alabama grad student alum. Does the political climate come into effect at all with regard to a prosecutor's decision whether to charge or not?
Should not. Absolutely not. It's a question of doing the right thing. A question of seeking justice, without fear or, without having any kind of fealty to anybody other than the law. And so, people are human and folks can be, persuaded one way or another by different things. But when you take that oath, your job is to do justice, and it can't be interfered by any types of allegiances or anything else that might be involved.
What would be, you said they appear to be going after the low-hanging fruit. What would be the impetus? I mean, other than doing the right thing, what would be the impetus to also pursue Miller and Bradley if there was a suspicion that they might have been involved?
That's the impetus.
Doing the right thing?
Yeah, that's doing justice. If they were involved, you have to go after them if there's evidence. But if there's not enough evidence, we can think all we want about the fact that, are they innocent or not? But, in this case, as you would take it to a jury, if a jury says not guilty, doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is innocent. It means that the government hasn't proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And there's a difference there. And this would be the same thing. It may not be necessarily that Brandon Miller is not, a part of this thing, that he's solely without guilt. It just means that they can't prove it.
Right. So going back to when you worked as a prosecutor in Brooklyn, and I'm getting into the nitty-gritty of the law here, but I'm going to give you an example, and you might not think it's analogous, but I'm going to run it by you. If you left the gun on your kitchen table and your 4-year-old got up and fired it off and injured himself or the dog or the neighbor, you would be liable for your child for leaving that gun laying around in Brooklyn, correct?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you better have a license for the weapon, and
Right.
secondly, it's criminally negligent, and it's foreseeable that if you leave the gun around with a child in the house, that the possibility of the child picking up the gun and doing damage with it is absolutely objectively foreseeable. So therefore, it's criminal negligence. Again, off the top of my head, haven't looked at the penal code in a while, but I'm
Right.
pretty sure that it's close to that.
I'm pretty sure it's that way in New Jersey as well. So then my next question, and here's where I'm gonna make the analogy: isn't bringing a gun to an angry drunk, even if you have no idea what he's going to do with that, at a minimum, if he does something stupid with it, isn't that kind of like leaving it on the kitchen table?
Well, remember, his attorney says that Miller didn't even know the gun was there.
That is not what his attorney said. He didn't see the gun. No one saw the gun because the gun was concealed. He never specifically used the words know. Knowing and seeing are two different things.
Well, I mean, I'll put it this way. If he never saw the gun, then how can you prove that he knew it was there? I didn't see it. So
Well,
you don't know if
he
it's
sees
there
it.
or not.
He sees Miller in Miller's hand, and then Miller gets in the car, and then Miller gets in the car and puts it under his jacket. So you can technically.
You're talking about Miller. Wait a minute. You're talking about Miller or Miles?
I'm saying he sees Miles with the gun,
Miles.
or he knows, or maybe he knows that Miles carries the gun wherever he goes. I don't know, but he knows Miles has the gun. He knows Miles gets in the car. Miles takes the gun out of his pants or whatever, puts it under his jacket. So the lawyer can technically say, well, he never saw the gun. That's different than knowing that the gun is there or having a good sense that the gun is there.
Well, and there you go. You just raised a doubt. You might, but it's not beyond a reasonable doubt that he knows that the gun is there.
Right. I guess
because you can make an argument. You can make an argument that because he didn't see the gun, how would you say he knew that the gun was there? Even though he knows that Miles carries a gun, he knows everything, but he did not see the gun.
Well, the thing of it is
in the car. That's my point.
Miller's text, though, indicates that not only did he know that the gun was there, or know that Miles had a gun or owns a gun, it also indicates that he knew where it was.
Well, I don't know. The text says what? Bring my joint?
Right, but
okay.
You don't say that to somebody. You don't say that to somebody unless you.
I understand that, and I agree with you. But again, we're talking two different standards. One is, the common sense element that if a guy says "bring my gun," he must have a gun here and something's wrong, and therefore, why am I even doing this? The other side of it is the argument to be made from their standpoint is he was going to pick him up anyway. That's the argument that's the position that they're taking. He was going to pick him up anyway, and he did not see the text, is what I read. He did not see the text until at some point. He was going to pick him up anyway.
That I have read, and I've heard, but I have not heard that he did not see the text, and it's certainly not in the lawyer's statement, which I also find.
Actually, let's. I mean, I don't know. I want to take a look at that because I thought that it said he did not see the text, that he was going to pick him up anyway.
They don't know if they don't know if he saw the text or not. That's the thing. The whole thing is Brandon Miller never read the text. Suppose that what was implicated from Miles as far as to bring the gun, what was going on, and so forth, which is just about impossible to prove. And that is the issue. If in fact you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he knew the gun was there and he transported the gun, now you implicate Miller in a different way. As I said, it could be facilitation. But because, he constructively knew that, the guy was
was going to take his weapon. Now, in Alabama, if I don't know what the possession laws are, I don't know if Miles was legally in possession of a gun.
Yes, he was. You can pretty
Yeah,
much
so I mean,
pretty much anybody can carry a gun around.
all right, well, there you go. And so just bringing the gun, transporting the gun to Miles unto itself is not illegal.
Well, it does break campus. Alabama.
Oh, that's different. That's what I'm
Right.
saying. One is
Right.
the law,
Right.
and the other is, campus regulation.
Right.
Which, again, as I said, Alabama won't do an investigation to elicit facts enough to discipline Miller because they're essentially ceding to the state in investigating this criminal case.
But okay, so let's talk about that. We know that good chance he's involved with underage drinking. Even his lawyer admits that he was planning on going to that club. Miles is
going to the club does not necessarily mean he's drinking.
Yeah, well, actually,
once again, you can unless he had alcohol in his system.
Yeah,
right.
True. But okay, but let's go through all this circumstantial stuff that starts to pile up into a big mound. So that was one, the underage drinking. Then the text indicates that he knew that Miles owned a gun, and Miles, of course, lived on campus. So that means Miles had a gun on campus. Then we know he was transporting the gun, and we also, of course, know that the worst of all circumstances, it resulted in a murder. How can Alabama not?
University of Alabama.
Right. How can the University of Alabama not want to look into this more deeply, aside from what's going on legally, and not from the point of view that was Brandon Miller responsible for this murder, or was it, was he somehow complicit with this murder? But did he violate school policy? Because you have all this other stuff on the side that says pretty much it looks like. Yeah, I think if you dig deep enough, you find that he did violate school policy. Why wouldn't they do that?
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily agreeing with their decision, but I can hear them essentially saying that, there is an investigation going on into criminal activity, and that their investigation ultimately could interfere with that investigation, particularly if they turn up facts that the defense attorneys at some point can use to possibly exonerate or if nothing else to create reasonable doubt in any type of criminal trial. That happens a lot. You don't want parallel investigations going on in a criminal situation by an authority that's not law enforcement, because you create opportunities for the defense essentially to negate or to question investigative facts picked up by the state. You just don't want them to do that because they don't interfere with the prosecution.
So you're saying to me, because the one question I would think that should be asked of Brandon Miller by the university is, how long did you know Darius Miles had a gun on campus? And you're saying the police wouldn't want them to ask that question?
But so what's the value of asking that question?
The value is this young man, I've almost called him a child. This young man is about to become a millionaire with power and influence, and he will have unequaled power over the average person. Okay. And do you really want this person influencing our children, our society?
All right, all that may be true, but quite honestly, it's irrelevant to the situation at hand. You don't necessarily control that, and it absolutely sounds retributive in some way, shape, or form. When you say that this guy's going to have all this money and he's going to have influence, well, people have to make that judgment themselves. And quite honestly, the purpose of discipline, the purpose of law enforcement, has as much to do with prevention, with public safety, with all sorts of different things that are in the public's interest. I don't necessarily see the fact that you want to go after this young man when he has no criminal culpability. And if he did, I would say by all means go get him. But if it's just to kind of diminish his influence, that can be done by just his implication of being involved in this.
Well,
Alabama doesn't, but when you weigh the two different values, him with the power and he may possibly influence versus creating a situation where in your prosecution you come up with certain conflicting facts or certain facts that ultimately hinder the prosecution of the actual perpetrators. I'm going to err on the side of not doing anything at all until that investigation is over. The thing is, if it wasn't such a thing as one and done, if he had to go on and play at Alabama another year or two or three, you'd be able to focus on your rationale. But at this point in time, you err on the side of justice for the victim in that case, and you got to go after what you have in order to get justice instead of the speculative stuff.
Right. So just to be clear, you're saying that asking if the university asking how long he knew the gun was Miles had a gun to inquire whether he had been following school policy, you think that is would be counterproductive.
Well, let me ask you a question. What does it matter how long he had it? He had it. And if that's
right, but we don't
school policy,
right,
if
right,
having
but
a
I
gun
mean,
on campus
right.
is
So
against school policy, then
I guess right. My point is, why is Brandon Miller still playing if he knew that Miles had a gun on campus?
No, but he didn't have the gun, Rich.
Right, but Miles was breaking a significant school policy.
But Miles was, and so that's on Miles.
And so
Miller's knowledge doesn't have anything to do with it.
Well, it does. It's in Alabama's school policy that you're supposed to report things that could result in serious problems. I have it up in the document. I mean, I could read it to you, and it basically says being present during any violation of university policy or code of student conduct in such a way as to condone, support, encourage that violation. This is saying that you're supposed to report this.
No, what it's saying is if you're present when it happens, knowledge.
Right. And students who anticipate or observe such violation are expected, if possible, to report any potential violation before it occurs or report details of the violation after its occurrence.
And what's the penalty?
The penalty is a whole different system. They have like a court, kind of like their own court thing. So yeah.
So he would have to go through all of that stuff at this stage. And as I said, by the time that happens, Brandon Miller's gone.
Yeah.
Well, so in your opinion, it doesn't matter.
You can't suspend him because now you violate his due process. So you're making him guilty until proven innocent, as opposed to the other way around. So ultimately, after they have a hearing,
well, no, you wouldn't be suspending it. You wouldn't be suspending him for what happened on January 15th. You'd be suspending him what happened prior to January 15th.
That's like I said, though. I just asked you. So in order to prove that he had the knowledge, you'd have to go through a hearing, right?
Right.
And how long? When would that hearing be scheduled? And how long would it take? And eventually, by the time it all gets done, as I said, we're in March already.
Right.
In 3 weeks, he's gone.
Right.
Len, based on the information that's come out, I think it's impossible. I mean, to gain any type of to charge him, first of all, and impossible to gain any type of conviction whatsoever in a criminal trial. I think that goes without saying. But in the future, or in the near future, whatever it may be, could you see a judgment in a civil trial going against him based on the information that has come out. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that a civil suit is certainly more viable. Again, if you have circumstantial evidence based on the standard of proof. You know, beyond a reasonable doubt is a lot heavier than the preponderance. You know,
And to be
preponderance
clear,
is 50-50.
51-49%
Right.
I think he was
Right.
involved.
If
That's enough on a
if
civil.
the scale weighs just a
Right.
little bit, it starts 50-50, and if it weighs just a little bit,
That's enough.
and the other way, then that's enough for a jury or a trier of fact to find in favor of the plaintiff. And so that's a little bit different. And some of these facts would probably play a lot better in a civil trial, based on common sense and based on some of the other stuff. That's when your question gets asked, Richard, about how long have you known that he had a gun? And shouldn't you have known, or you can impute constructive knowledge that when he said, bring me my joint, or when you see all this other stuff, you can impute that to having foreseeability that something wrong was going to happen. And by transporting the weapon, if you can impute that constructive knowledge, then maybe you can name him as a facilitator by preponderance, as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. But again, it's all speculative in my opinion, and quite honestly, the amount of damage it could do would certainly necessitate and probably force a settlement. So he probably wouldn't even get to a trial in that type of situation. And I think that is probably a foreseeable occurrence going forward.
Would you have liked to seen a suspension for Miller and Bradley, or do you think that would have made the situation worse?
No, I think that they should have been held out for any number of reasons, including the potential of that damage, and quite honestly, to teach a lesson regarding consequence. As a parent, if that was my son, for doing something idiotic, like being there in the first place, etc., I'd have to say, wait a second, let's sit down and talk about this. And until we get, straight answers and stuff, obviously you can't play. Something along those lines. And let's face it, the administration, the athletic department, the coach are all kind of surrogate caregivers, and should be focused on, the future and leadership and development. Because they say that all the time when they recruit, give me your son and let me help develop him. And so now is an opportunity for them to do that. And it just seems as though, the interest of having him play and them being ranked number one, or having a number one seed and going into the tournament seem to be more important than, than teaching this lesson that would serve him more of a lifetime. Right now, the lesson is, especially in light of what happened with the walk-on and the pat down during the pregame celebration, in light of all of that, the lesson is you can do dumb stuff if you're a star with no consequence. And if you're not a star, you do dumb stuff, we're going to suspend you immediately. It doesn't seem to make sense, but that's what they did.
So you're saying it's within Alabama's right to hold those players out without any kind of investigation?
I think that based upon the circumstance that occurred, that they can hold them out for any number of things if there's some probable cause. Remember, I know one TV commentator said that Brandon Miller has rights, but as a lot of people have pointed out, there is no right to play college basketball. That's a privilege, and within that privilege, there are certain things that you have to do in exchange for that privilege. And one of them is to stay out of situations like that. And until you investigate, I think until you investigate and come to a conclusion as to what exactly happened, then I think that the school has a right to hold you out.
Right. I agree. Got one final question for you, and I've tried to talk to some of my NBA contacts, but nobody seems to really want to comment on this. How do you think this affects Miller's draft stock? I mean, right now he's number 3 on our board. We consider him, a top 3 pick, but yet I don't know what to do with that. And part of the reason is, everybody's probably going to feel a little differently on this. But what do you think is going to happen, come draft day?
Between now and draft day, as long as he is not a person of interest or subject to criminal liability, he's going to be number 3 pick. And that's as simple as that. What happens to his money afterwards in a civil situation is unfortunately going to be on him. But right now, no.
You don't think the NBA is going to do their own snooping around to see whether this kid was involved or not?
Yeah, they might, but again, unless he is held criminally liable for something, then I don't think it's going to have any impact. Again, you're talking about a business, and you're talking about the NBA, who, short of him actually being criminally charged, they're going to see this as kind of a blip on his screen. And, from a character standpoint and everything else, if, he's proven to be reliable enough to play the game, reliable enough, but for this incident that doesn't have any criminal ramifications, then, quite honestly, they'll probably feel that they can control him, and he can learn from it and be a model citizen going forward.
Right.
Yeah, my final thought would be that, we're talking an awful lot about, Brandon Miller, as rightly we should, and his involvement, as well as that of certainly at least the accused and alleged perpetrators. But, we still need to speak to the role that university, as well as the athletic department and the coach, have played, going forward, because again, I think they've abdicated their positions with regard to leadership of young people, and I think they certainly need to do a better job of demonstrating, that this is based on principle as much as anything else, and they need to take an even-handed approach, as well as an approach that, you would expect if you were a parent of a young man or a young woman going to that school, how you would, how you would deal with them in circumstances such as these. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And obviously feel awful for the Harris family. The young lady even had a child, so I believe 4 or 5 years old. So
yeah, that's first and foremost, and that's why I say, considering the totality of the situation, it's a lot more serious than they would have you believe based upon their actions. And I say they, again, the university, the athletic department, as well as the coach.
Right. Does the prosecutor have extreme pressure on him right now?
I don't think so. I remember, this is still sports, and as crazy as people are about sports, when you place the reality of someone losing their lives, someone losing a daughter, someone losing a mother, I think it brings people and it brings the public back to reality, and it certainly should, be an example for the prosecutor to recognize what's most important, and that is doing justice for those victims.
Right. So, Len, I want to thank you so much for your time. Always enjoy having you on the show. I wish we could talk about a happier topic, but maybe next time you come on, we'll talk about something sports. But this was sports related, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Something not so grim.
Yeah.
Very nice meeting you, Len.
My pleasure. All right, you too. Take care. Yeah.
So we're now joined by Nick Alvarez, who covers is a writer for the Alabama Media Group and covers the Alabama basketball team. You can find his articles on AL.com. And Nick, you've had a bunch of stories related to this incident. Do you want to give us just a brief Cliff Notes version of what happened on January 15th and what you know now?
Yeah. Okay. Trying to think of a brief way to put it. But
yeah,
essentially on January 14th, Alabama beat LSU on a home game. A couple hours later, as we kind of got to the midnight, January 15th, players went out to celebrate. Brandon Miller was I think he was like the ride for Darius Miles, who's no longer part of the team. We'll get to that in a second. And Jaden Bradley, another freshman on the team. They were going to go to the nightclub, per Miller's attorney. Miller thought the line was too long. He wanted to go somewhere else. He went to a restaurant. Miller was their ride for the night and was going to pick up Miles in the time between that. Darius Miles, a friend of his, Michael Davis from back home in Maryland, and a couple of other people not associated with the team got into a bit of a disagreement. The subject of it, which I think was around the victim of all of this, Jamea Harris, she was kind of approached by these guys. She didn't really want to interact with them. Went back to the car. Things were said. We're not completely sure. And then somewhere in there, Darius Miles, who was texting Brandon Miller for a ride, texted him to bring him his gun, which had apparently been in the back of Miller's car underneath some clothes, per Miller's attorney. Miller was there. Davis got the gun from Miles, who retrieved her from Miller's car. And then 8 shots were fired outside a nightclub on the Tuscaloosa Strip, a pretty busy spot in town. And 8 shots were fired, 2 of which went through the windshield of Miller's car, 1 of which struck and fatally hit Jamea Harris. So in the time immediate aftermath, Darius Miles was dismissed from the team. He and Davis were arrested on, I don't even know, like last week. In the first public testimony from Tuscaloosa prosecutors, it was revealed that what I just said, Miller had brought the gun. His attorney said he didn't know what the gun was going to be used for. It's not even completely clear if Miller has read that text. There's a lot we don't know, which I'm sure we'll get into. But the gist of it, Miller has not been punished by the team. He's been cleared by the university and Tuscaloosa police of any wrongdoing. He hasn't missed a game. He's been one of the best players in the country and one of the best players on Alabama. As you know, last night they locked up the SEC regular season championship.
Right. To your knowledge, what did Miller do after the shooting?
So part is unclear. All we really have from this is Miller's attorney statement and the information provided by police. In Alabama, you're not allowed to bring a recording device into a courtroom. So our reporter for AL.com and other reporters who were on the site for the hearing last week were hearing all this kind of like in the back of a room, like jotting down what they could. And the investigators, clearing Miller of any wrongdoing from the outset, didn't really go into much detail about his whereabouts and his kind of blow by blow of how it went down. Greg Byrne, Alabama's athletic director, went on an ESPN podcast on Wednesday as all this was kind of coming out and mentioned that it was about within seconds of Miller arriving to the scene, the shooting started. Miller's attorney mentioned that Miller's car was parked on the strip. Jamea Harris's mother alleged that both Miller and Jaden Bradley's cars were actually blocking in the car Jamea was in, preventing them from being able to get away before the shooting started. So there's a lot of kind of ongoing things with the court trial. So there's not really a clear answer to that.
So there's a key part on that, I'm with you on that, and that's a huge part of evidence. Was it blocking or was it not? Now, Miller's attorney's case is that Miller was there. His car was parked before Harris's Jeep
pulled up. Yes.
And that means if that's the case, he was there when Miles Davis, I guess, was dancing around the car and all that stuff. It contradicts itself a little bit because supposedly the shooting almost occurred minutes after Miller arrived. So that I'm having a hard time understanding that, and I'm having a hard time understanding what Bradley was doing there as well.
Yes, and I think there's some questions that not only national reporters have had as well, but some people around Tuscaloosa and around the team have had, not within the program. I want to be clear on that. From the jump, it's been also unclear what Alabama has known about the situation. Nate Oates, Alabama's head coach, got into a little bit of trouble last week when he had mentioned Miller was at the quote wrong place at the wrong time, which obviously led to a lot more headlines and scandal. What I think could be gathered is from comparing what Oates has said and what Greg Burns said on that podcast. He also has not been. It should just be noted that since all this came out, there have been no Alabama players made available for interviews at press conferences, at games. None of them, including Miller. Byrne has only spoken on the topic in that one pre-recorded ESPN podcast. So it should be noted that like when they're talking about this, it didn't seem as if they knew about the text that Miles sent Miller requesting the gun. Miller's attorney said that, again, it's unclear if Miller knew the gun was in the car, but the attorney stated, I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but he said that he didn't know the context in which the gun would be used. It's a lot of like gray area, I guess, in terms of like what we know. But the big part of this is that they've said that Miller's cooperating the entire time. So it could be a situation where he is a witness for the defense or for the prosecution in terms of the layout of how all this worked out. But again, it's a lot of things that we don't know currently.
It would seem to me that Bradley's presence just seems kind of curious. In his own car, not if he was with Miller, but the fact that he came in his own car makes it kind of curious.
The only thing I could gather from that is Miles claims he was trying to get a hold of Miller for a long period of time.
About an hour. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe it was a sense where he couldn't get a hold of Miller, tried to get a hold of Bradley, and that's how Bradley showed up is my only common sense that I could make out of it.
Potentially. And I think a lot of the questions that you guys are raising makes complete sense when kind of what's come out. And I think part of this that has confused and frustrated a lot of people, including the family, which in a storytale.com mentioned that, you know, they don't want the kind of prayers and forgiveness that Oates keeps on mentioning about during his press conferences because they felt harmed by his statements and they would like an apology or at least his condolences. It's unclear if he's done that. He's since said that the administration does not want him talking about this anymore. So with a lot of what we don't know, it just kind of compounds, I think, a lot of what we're talking about. And it makes it hard to really kind of see how we're moving forward until some of the more details from the trial comes out.
In the statement that I received from the university, they don't express any condolences to the family either, which I thought was since the incident in January occurred, they've been pretty forthright in nearly every press conference that Oates is asked about. He'll mention something about praying for Jamea's 5-year-old son, praying for the family, and feeling terrible about the situation. But yes, since the column on AL.com came out with the families requesting he not say their names anymore, they haven't directly mentioned it since. Gotcha. So I'm a little foggy on Alabama law. I'm no lawyer, which is why we had Len Elmore on. But he doesn't know the specifics. He's an attorney in New York, so he's not familiar with Alabama law either. But it almost seems to me that the news reports have been saying that it's almost irrelevant if Miller knew a gun was in the car or read the text. Are you kidding?
We had a story come out that, talking to legal experts, that said intent is the key piece of this. If Miller knew what the gun was for, then he is an accessory. Granted, if he knew the text, I think that's probably maybe a conversation for lawyers. If like him reading the text implies the context in which it would be used, but it wasn't like, from what we currently know, it seems like Miller, at least from a university standpoint, was this kind of a third party to this and not directly involved.
Right. But at the same time, if he did read the text, which is kind of damning in itself for Miller, because that text implies not only did he know that Miles had a gun on campus, owned a gun, it also indicates that he knows where it is. Okay. But that comes down to Miller versus Miles, word against word. But what I'm curious about is, I would think in where I live in New Jersey, or Len, lives in New York, you can't just bring a gun to an angry drunk and not be responsible if that drunk does something dumb with it. Do you know how I would, you might not be accused of murder or even accessory murder.
So I don't think we know.
Can you
know if Miles was drunk or not? But an angle of this I did look into is that on University of Alabama, their campus policy is that students cannot have their guns with them on campus. There are storage lockers that they can have their guns in. They can sign it out, go to a range or whatever, and then bring it back in. When I contacted University of Alabama police saying, like, hey, at the very least, this shows Miller had a gun with him on campus, they responded saying, well, Tuscaloosa Strip is technically the jurisdiction of the Tuscaloosa Police Department. Now take that with what you will, though that would say that technically, again, I will emphasize technically.
Did they give you any indication whether Miles had checked it in with them put it in the locker?
No.
So you don't know the answer to that? So
no, I would assume it obviously wouldn't have been. Yeah, it seemed like it was on him at least for the day. I don't think he would have checked it out. Right.
So it's safe to you're assuming that Miles has been possessing this gun on campus against school policy, correct?
From what we know, I think that'd be a logical step to take. Yeah.
Okay. Again, right. More circumstantial stuff.
Nick, what's the general culture as far as the community in Tuscaloosa and how they feel about Alabama basketball? And why I ask that is this: we have the pat down incident that Oates came and in the press conference, hey, I didn't know what was going on. I was drawing up plays. We have the incident last night in the game, right? There was a couple ejections and the Alabama team came on the floor. And it seems like after an incident like this, they would be on their best behavior. To me, it seems to be the opposite.
I think that's a very fair point. I think part of the things that some people are bumping up against is that from the beginning, Alabama has expressed condolences to all involved in this tragic situation, no matter how you cut it. Though some of the actions, like you mentioned, the pat down, they said they were doing that introduction all year. Well, maybe you should have reevaluated it after that incident happens, regardless of Miller's involvement in it. Maybe if another player had it, it wouldn't have been news because, not every player is a projected top 5 NBA draft pick, but you maybe would have wanted to take another look at it. Similarly, if the team, when Oates asked the players about the pregame routine, they compared it to kind of like a TSA check that Brandon was then cleared for takeoff. Again, a logical step further, and I put this in the story, I put up with it, like the TSA checks people for weapons. So there's a lot of kind of not care and attention, I think, being paid to some of the severity of the situation. But in terms of the culture on Alabama basketball, I mean, it's not a surprise to say that Alabama's a football town in terms of everything kind of runs through Bryant-Denny Stadium and Nick Saban, in terms of the public importance. Though I will say, because the program has been on a rise since Oates took over in 2019, that there has been more interest. There has been much more conversations about getting a new stadium, or a new arena, or at least refurbishing Coleman Coliseum. So before the Arkansas game last Saturday, I went around and I talked to season ticket holders, essentially asking them how they felt about Alabama's handling of the situation. And many of them, for better or worse, took Brennan's lawyer's comments as the facts of the situation and referenced privacy concerns regarding what we should know about his life. On Twitter, you'll find Alabama fans citing that Miller was delivering someone's property to them, and you have no right to withhold someone's property for them. Again, there's a interesting mix of fandom and kind of morality crossing here, and not in the best way. Though I won't blanketly say that Alabama fans aren't proud of this. I've gotten emails from fans that have read my article, assumed that I am completely okay with how Alabama's handled the situation, regardless of how I actually feel about it. And are, chastising me for even writing about Brandon Miller still. So like it's a mixed bag, I think, for sure. But at least for the people at the games, obviously a big atmosphere versus Auburn last night. You're not going to find very many anti-Alabama people in there. There seems to be a bit of a kind of a general consensus in this following with how the universities handled this.
What do you make of the fact that, to my knowledge, and I have the lawyer statement right here, that at least in the initial press release, he never clearly stated that Miller didn't know the gun was in the car. He used the word see. See and know are two different words. You're a writer. You know this. So he doesn't say that Miller didn't know. He says he didn't see it. Well, of course, no one saw it if it was under clothing. And what do you make of the fact that he also doesn't say whether Miller read the text or not? Don't you find that
kind of? Yeah, I think those are questions that need to be answered. And I think Miller's attorney is following the university line of he's been cleared of wrongdoing. He was cleared of wrongdoing in the hours, after the investigation had started in January. At least what Alabama has said, that they immediately contacted authorities, and Miller and Bradley were deemed fully cooperative and not a suspect at the time. Should be noted that Davis and Miles were arrested very early, I believe, in that morning. In terms of what he knows or what he doesn't know, I think again, I'm no lawyer, but with the legal elements of this, I think there's also kind of a protection of the moral side and how Miller's perceived publicly. He's still, as of today, he's still being he's being forecasted in mock drafts to go top 5, top 4. So when you look at that, I do think there's kind of a worry of all right, is he going to be tied to this forever? Again, I'm not speaking on Brandon's behalf, but I do think his lawyer, as his job is to make sure that Brandon is legally fine in all of this, also to try to make the situation as clear as possible, other than Brandon Miller delivered a murder weapon to a scene.
Right.
Is Miller's dash cam going to be released?
I would doubt it. I'm not versed in Alabama law, but Alabama is not known for having the best open records request.
I don't know if you know Dan Wenzel, but he's works for Yahoo Sports, and he's been reporting on this for the whole time. Not as much as you, but he wrote several articles damning Miller and damning Alabama. And one of the points that he made was if Miller isn't culpable in some way, why didn't Miller's attorney address those things directly? Why did he use the word see as opposed to know? Why didn't he, say whether he saw the text or not? And the fact that they didn't address them is kind of, curious at best.
Yeah, that's totally a fair point. Another reason, if Alabama has known about this for some extent for the last month, there was an opportunity to kind of get ahead of it. And there hasn't been. I'll reiterate,
right.
We've only heard that Brandon is, I use the right term here, he feels for all involved, and he has shown the correct amount of, care to the situation. We've heard that only from Greg Byrne and Nate Oates.
Right.
We haven't heard from Brandon himself, right. And I doubt that will happen tomorrow. Alabama has a scheduled press conference, and then they'll play their last regular season game on the road, and players aren't usually available after road games anyway. So yes, I do. There's an element of we haven't heard from Brandon, which clouds, and we're kind of left sorting through these facts, which, as you both mentioned earlier, kind of leads to some more questions.
Right. So let's turn to Alabama. There is a pile of circumstantial evidence, and you would think, for I asked Len, I said, with this pile of circumstantial evidence, that Miller might not be a model citizen, or may not have the best judgment, and may somehow, at least indirectly, been responsible for this situation. For example, if he knew Miles had the gun on campus for months, one could say, well, and it's in Alabama's policy that says, if you see a violation taking place, it's your responsibility to report it. So, one could say, the fact that was never reported, indirectly at least, resulted in, in the death. So my question then, I asked Len then, why isn't Alabama, looking into this more? Why aren't they saying, like, for example, to Miller, how long did you know Miles had a gun on campus? His answer was he thinks that the police would prefer that Alabama doesn't do its own investigation at this point.
I will note that Alabama has, again, details are unclear. I'm only getting this from the podcast appearance Greg Bird did, but Alabama has had an investigation into this. I don't know if it's ongoing or not.
Yeah, well,
in that same
wait, if I may interrupt you, in that same interview, he said it was news to me that Miller, got the text. So yeah, the great investigation, Greg. Well done.
I will say that, yeah, and Greg mentioned that when Alabama officials are talking about this case regarding Miller or interacting with him about this case, they are going through both their attorneys because of the situation.
Right.
So I think it's important to note as well.
So what do you think that that's the way the police would prefer it, that Alabama doesn't do its own investigation?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that from the jump, like I said, Alabama, when investigating this, found the three players, or heard three of their players were involved, two of which were immediately cleared by authorities. The one that wasn't, the one that was actually indicted, was quickly dismissed from the team and his roster page was down. Right. In terms of Alabama's own investigation, I mean, that's a good point. Clearly they haven't found anything wrong, and they've said that, and he became the fastest freshman in team history to reach 500 points. So, like, in this last month, also in the time between us finding this out last week and the initial January 14th, 15th incident, NATO's got a contract extension. So there's the way Alabama has been acting, at the very least, implies that they have, like Oates said in a quote to me not to me personally, but into a press conference last week, they feel like they've done nothing wrong in how they've handled the situation.
Now, when you say he's been cleared, I asked Len, will they still be looking into this, or are they just grabbing the low-hanging fruit and running with it? And it was his impression that still, that Miller could be charged later, and they may not be done looking into it. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I definitely think there's more that's going to come out. I think the statement the police have made saying that Miller has been cooperative opens the door that he could be a witness, because at the very least he was there and he could answer questions about, hey, did he know a gun was involved? Not even implicating himself, but just to set up a pattern of behavior for Miles. So I do think from a legal standpoint that there is more involving Miller in this. Probably not, though, from what's been told now in terms of a and he won't be prosecuted from this, it seems like, or won't be charged with anything, but he could still be, he could still end up in a courtroom.
Right, but Len's feeling is, if there was some evidence to come to light that they it was their responsibility, for the public to pursue him, and so he might not be totally cleared.
Yes, well, that's potentially true. I think it'd be rather staunch about face if, like, the first thing police determined hours afterward, and they changed. I think there'd have to be another element to the story that, like, the public's not aware of.
The only thing I can imagine anything criminally being pursued with Miller is if the DA offers some sort of plea to Miles implicating Miller. That's the only way I could really imagine Miller being going forward criminally. Other than that, unless there's an admission. Other than that, I really don't know how you can prove without a reasonable doubt there's intent.
Yeah, and it's very complicated, and I think in terms of spinning this forward, the next element of this will be next week in Nashville for the SEC tournament, which oddly enough is about 20 minutes away from Miller's hometown. He is, I don't know if he's expected to be made available, but players will be made available for the SEC tournament. Like, I don't think the SEC will take on the latest version of this controversy by not allowing the players from the number 1 team in the country, or number 2 team in the country, number 1 seed in their tournament, to not speak, including like the best player on the court during the week in Nashville. So when Miller speaks, he might defer to lawyer statements. He might, be remorseful. He could say anything, but I do think like that will be kind of the next element, at least the Miller part of this, in kind of examining kind of how he feels and kind of what we can kind of parse out.
Right. All right, Nick, I got one more question for you. Whether there was an investigation or not, it's within Alabama's rights to suspend any player, right? Under with if they're under suspicion of being involved in something, correct?
Yeah, Alabama.
So what do you make of the fact that they haven't done so? I mean, how could the police? I don't understand how the police could clear Miller so quickly. I mean, that just seems odd. But is that why Alabama is saying they're not suspending him? I mean, they consider this a closed matter as far as Miller's going, and they. Yeah. I mean, for example,
they do.
The fact that the AD comes out and says, "Oh, well, it was news to me that he received the text," obviously means they haven't looked into this very deeply. So I don't. I would think the right thing to do would be to suspend he and Bradley until it was resolved.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that. I think the overall sentiment of we've done nothing wrong with this, let's move forward, is kind of part of the uglier side of kind of the justification of how this whole situation's been handled that I think has a lot of people upset. And I mean, I could sit here and say that, well, Alabama's having its best basketball season in program history. Why would they do anything to jeopardize that? But that's probably of course. What I will say is, though, that, they had a chance to get out for a month in front of this. They didn't, whether they knew this was coming or not.
Yeah.
They haven't punished him at all, or Brad. They haven't punished either of them at all. They have been staunch in saying that they've done nothing wrong. They've handled the situation as best as possible, aside from some regretful comments by natives at a press conference. If they were to suspend him, if they were to look back on anything, then I think that this opens up a whole other can of worms in regard to, or how did you handle the first month? How did you handle the first hours afterward? I think Alabama is just trying to push forward as soon as they can. It should be noted that Brandon Miller will not be around after April. He'll be leaving for the NBA draft, more likely than not. So it's weird. It's gross. It's similar to other things we've seen in sports in the recent news in the last couple of years. It's not more than that. It's kind of part of the game. And you mentioned a Yahoo columnist. There are a bunch of others who have, rightfully or wrongfully, gone and said, "Hey, Alabama, this is not how you'd want to handle this." It makes a lot of people look bad, and especially when press conferences are going by and national outlets aren't getting questions, or haven't been given the opportunity to ask questions because they don't want to bring this up. Like last week, an ESPN reporter had to push for his question because they only wanted to talk about the game. So it's one of the situations where the us against the world thing is kind of taking on kind of an ugly tone to it.
Yeah, it is.
The optics are horrible. They're just horrible. It looks like Alabama did not look into this situation. The fact that just the fact that he knew that Miles owned a gun is something that violates school policy. Miller's still playing.
Though I will say, at this last night, crazy crowd in Coleman Coliseum as Alabama won that wild game against Auburn in overtime. I haven't been to an SEC regular season championship celebration, but that looked about as commonplace as anyone would look like. So in the building, maybe not behind closed doors, but it does seem like they're trying to go about business as usual.
Well, yeah, but yeah, they're going
Yeah.
to. But yeah, and
I'm thinking from like a fan perspective too. Like Miller has gotten more of he has gotten kind of a renewed vigor from ovations from fans, like when he was announcing through starting lineups, and
I saw that.
so it's
Nick, fans and writers are two different breeds. And personally, I don't have a ton of respect. Well, I'm not going to go that far, but I'll stop right there. Just fans can see what they want to see. I'll say that. Well, there's just so many unanswered questions, and I have a feeling that we're going to find out some stuff that's not going to be positive for Brandon Miller, but he still might skate on this.
Yeah, the court of public opinion is still very much ongoing with Miller. If a lot of people haven't already made up their mind one way or the other. And more information, whether it be Nashville press conferences next week, whether it be a continuation of the trial, we get more details of kind of the beat by beat of how the gun arrived and where it came from. I think that will only kind of add to that.
Yeah. Well, Nick, I know you got to run, and I really appreciate your time. It was very enlightening, and you're a northern boy down there. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you. My kind of go-to line for everyone is that I've been called a Yankee a bunch down here, and people don't know I'm a diehard Yankee fan. So it's definitely fun, but it's fun. It does like I always joked about it just means more thing down here, but going to Knoxville last fall for the Alabama-Tennessee game, being in some of the games this year for Alabama basketball. I mean, the fans do love it. Not this case aside, it is kind of that environment that kind of gets idealized. Right? It's kind of lived up to its fruition, at least my first year or two down here on the beat.
Right. Well,
hey,
thanks.
Nick, nice meeting you, man.
Yeah, it was really.
Yeah,
I appreciate your time, and thanks so much. And like I said, be safe. All right, so we heard from a guy on the ground, boots on the ground, so to speak, and we heard from somebody with a Harvard law degree. Change anything as far as you're thinking, or what are you thinking at this point?
Yeah, I'm thinking the same exact thing, kind of going into it. I feel there is a lot of information we do not have.
Right.
But any type of criminal charges filed against Miller is not the right way to go based on the information we have. With that being said, I think what has made this so much more worse is how Alabama has handled the situation.
And Miller too.
Miller. What is the problem? I did not see any type of problem or issue that would have helped a lot of people suspending Miller and Bradley from the South Carolina game on. It wouldn't have affected Alabama's season, and it would have made a lot of other people satisfied with the direction the university was going.
Well, I don't think they're going to dig up the truth. Like, if you just suspend them for 2 games, that's just kind of just going through the motions. I think the whole point of suspending him would be to get to the bottom of the truth. In Alabama, at least publicly, is saying, well, we know the truth. He's been cleared. But what's unclear to everybody else is how could the police come to such a quick conclusion that Miller wasn't involved? And we know Alabama hasn't looked into it very carefully, or they wouldn't be saying that they were sideswiped last week, a month after this incident went down. So they're saying, well, we didn't know there was a text. Well, you couldn't have done much of an investigation then.
I think you could. I see your point, and I see where you're going with, but in Alabama law, as far as what we're learning, as far as the big word we're talking about here is intent.
Right.
And all that was needed to clear Miller was, I didn't know the gun was in the back seat. I didn't know what he needed it for. I didn't know what was going on. and that's enough to clear him.
But
Now,
see, Len didn't say that. Len, made it, sounded like if he was, I didn't really press Len on this, but he gave me the indication that it was found that he was negligent or reckless. Len seemed to indicate he thought he could still be charged.
if he had intent, Len mentioned he had to know what the gun was being used for.
So you're saying he had to know that there was a dispute?
He had to know that there was a crime going to take place with him giving him the gun. Had to be known.
Well, see, that makes no sense to me. Once again, we're going back to laying the gun on the kitchen table and letting your 5-year-old pick it up. If you know that there's a dispute going down, if you know the gun's in the car and you were told to bring the gun to the dispute, then
that's the question. Did Miller? We don't know if Miller.
Right. Well, exactly. And I don't see how the police could have cleared him so quickly that he didn't know that there was a dispute going down. But yeah.
It was good.
But here's the other point I want to make. Even if he's cleared by Alabama law, he wouldn't be cleared in other states, and not in my.
I think he would.
Not in my state. Not in Jersey.
I can't imagine how anybody prosecutes him. I have no idea how you get prosecuted for that.
Because you don't have to have intent to be reckless.
We can't prove recklessness.
You can.
No, you
can. If you know a dispute's going down and you bring somebody a gun.
But we don't know. He did not know.
Well, that's my point. We don't know. We don't know.
If he knew a dispute was going down, and I think there is, like, for example, one part of what was talked about as far as the text that was reported was this, and I think is a key part of evidence, where Miller sent a text to Miles sent a text to Miller saying someone was quote unquote faking, which means making threats without the means of backing it up. If Miller read the text, I believe you are correct.
Wow. I didn't even catch that.
That is a big deal.
Right.
So if you take a combination of blocking the road and him reading the text, I completely agree with your coming from.
Right.
Because that right there means there is a dispute or issue he is arriving at the scene of with a weapon that Miles requested. So the text that Miles sent Miller has that burden of proof. The question is, did Miller read it?
Right.
How do you prove that?
Yeah.
Unless he,
you could tell when somebody's looked at the text, but that doesn't necessarily mean they read it.
So unless he admitted it to someone else, let's say he admitted it to whoever, and they're willing to testify or come out with it, then you have something.
Right. I just hope that Len is right, and if they do come across other evidence, that they will pursue this and not just take the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And my gut tells me there's just too much here. Too much is fishy. That we're going to learn more, and it's not going to be good for Brandon Miller.
I'm having a hard time grasping the fact that we cannot find out for sure if Miller and Bradley's car blocked the Jeep. Because I think that's the most important evidence.
Well, reading the texts are pretty damn important too.
That as well, but reading the texts, right? Reading the text, you're going to have to take the word from Miller.
Right.
That's the only way you're going to know that. Blocking the road, there's surveillance, there's Miller's dash cam, that could be subpoenaed. There's a number of things you can find out with regard to that piece of evidence that you don't need Miller for.
Right. That's correct. The other piece of this is, Alabama has to be thinking, the way this whole thing went down, and they, one of the first questions, if I'm the president of the university, would have been, how long did he know that Miles had a gun on campus? And you would think that, I don't know, I don't know how the disciplinary process worked, but you think at least that one question would have been asked and pursued, and then you could suspend Miller, but I don't think they want to know the answer.
The hush-hush about it, the way Oates has handled it, the way the university has handled it, all has you questioning the situation.
Yeah. Personally, Nate Oates got an extension. I personally think he's going to hell.
I thought he's handled the worst out of anybody. Just saying, the pat down was just ridiculous.
Well, you got your kids. You got your kids hanging out at drinking establishments, running around with guns, and you don't know any of this?
Yeah.
I'm
in agreement with you. I am in agreement with you.
Yeah, it's just horrible, and it looks terrible for Oates. Alabama's trying to, cover their ass, and it's not making it any better. And then, of course, the players keep on doing things on the court that don't make it look any better.
That just kind of drives me nuts a little bit. Like I said, you'd think this had it on their best behavior, and it's far from what's happening.
Yeah.
And Nick said it in the last thing. This us against the world look is not looking good.
No, because you know what? They had no one died. You know who's against the world? The Harris family.
Yeah, no kidding. And unfortunately, this gets kind of lost in the translation, which is the most tragic part about it.
Right. All right. Well, I just felt we had to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, no, it was good.
I feel that this is kind of a travesty of justice. I mean, at least it has the potential to be. And so we did our best, Booney.
There you go. That's all you can do.
All right. Thank you, buddy.
All right, my friend. Thank you, Rich. Take care, buddy.
See you next week.
All right, my friend. Bye-bye.